Denizens of the night, welcome to another episode of the macabre, the terrifying. Broadcasting live from the inside of a confessional booth of a forgotten church, I will be your guide through the witching hours. Tonight, we will come face to face with an evil presence that lurks between the walls of St.Michael's church. We'll meet a young orphan named Andy, who must learn to navigate his new life and make new friends and deal with churchyard bullies. Oh, and did I mention that evil forces try to break into his room at night? And the statue of St. Agnes seems to watch him during Mass. Oh, yes, all this and more awaits Andy in the glow of the stained glass windows of St. Michael's. Let us go and pay a visit. This story is called I Was an Altar Boy When I Was Younger. We had a strange list of rules to follow, and was written by Malevolent Sin 666. When I was just 8 years old, my life took a dark and unexpected turn. My mother, a devout Catholic, who had taken me to church regularly, had been committed to the nearby Evergreen Mental Health Center after a harrowing incident. It was a foggy November evening, and I can still vividly recall the chilling screams that pierced through the walls of our home. Shadows danced wildly in our living room as I huddled in a corner, my heart pounding. My mother's eyes had been wide with terror, her voice trembling as she muttered something about the eyes in the darkness. It was a nightmarish episode that defied explanation, leaving her committed for her own safety, or so they said. Left without a guardian, I found myself in the care of St. Michael's Church and Orphanage. St. Michael's, a massive, centuries-old stone structure, loomed over the small town like a silent sentinel. It had always been a place of solace for my mother and me, where we sought refuge from life's trials, attending Mass every Sunday without fail. Now, it was to be my temporary home, a refuge of a different kind. The church was run by a stern priest named Father Matthias, a man with a reputation for his unwavering dedication to his faith. He had a presence that commanded respect, but his eyes held a hint of something deeper, something that unsettled me, even at such a young age. As I arrived for my first day at St. Michael's, the church seemed to greet me with a sense of eerie familiarity. Its towering stone walls held countless secrets, and the stained glass windows filtered the dim sunlight into an ethereal mosaic of colors that danced on the ancient pews below. The silence within was profound, broken only by the soft echo of my footsteps on the cold, polished marble floor. Father Matthias awaited me near the altar, his stern expression softening slightly as he caught sight of me. His gray cassock billowed as he approached, revealing the crucifix that hung from his neck, casting a faint shadow on his lined face. "Welcome, young one," Father Matthias said in a deep, soothing voice. "I am Father Matthias, and you may call me Father Matt. You'll find that St. Michael's is a place of solace, even though it may seem imposing at first." I nodded hesitantly, my heart still heavy with the weight of recent events. "I'm Andy," I replied, finding solace in the simplicity of my own name. Father Matt gave me a small smile and gestured for me to follow as he began the tour. "Come, Andy, let me show you around. St. Michael's has a rich history, and it has been a sanctuary for those in need for centuries." As we walked through the church, Father Matt shared stories of the church's past, its stained glass windows depicting scenes from biblical tales, the ornate statues of saints lining the walls, and the organ that had played its haunting melodies for generations. Despite the priest's attempt at making me feel at ease, an inexplicable chill seemed to persist in the air, as if the very stones of the church were keeping some ancient secret. We continued our tour through dimly lit corridors, passing doorways leading to mysterious chambers I could only imagine. Father Matt spoke of the strict routines and rituals that would become a part of my daily life, each one designed to strengthen my connection to the church and its faith. He spoke of the sacristy, where I would prepare for Mass, the choir loft, where I would sing praises to God, and the confessional, where secrets were laid bare. As we stood before the confessional, Father Matt turned to me, his gaze unyielding. "Andy, remember this," he said in a hushed tone. "What is said within these walls must never leave them. The sanctity of the confessional is paramount." I nodded, his words sinking in like a stone dropped into the depths of my soul. The sense of foreboding that had accompanied me to St. Michael's intensified, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd entered a world far more complex and unsettling than I had ever imagined, although my young mind felt ill-equipped to understand the weight of this revelation. Father Matthias continued our tour through the labyrinthine halls of St. Michael's, revealing the few other orphans who called this place home. We came across a small group of children, their faces etched with a mixture of curiosity and uncertainty. Most of them were younger than me, their eyes wide and innocent, contrasting sharply with the stern atmosphere of the church. "This is your new family for the time being, Andy," Father Matt announced, introducing me to each child in turn. "This is Mary. She's 9, he said, gesturing to a shy girl with auburn hair. Mary offered a timid smile in response. "Michael, who's 7, he continued, pointing to a boy with freckles and a mop of unruly blonde hair. Michael greeted me with an enthusiastic wave. "And this is Sarah, just a bit older than you, at 10, Father Matt said, indicating a quiet girl with long dark hair who seemed to regard me with a mixture of curiosity and caution. There were a few more children that Father Matt mentioned, but didn't introduce personally. He rattled off their names and ages, but they remained distant, like shadows in the background of my new life. As we moved on from the children, Father Matt's demeanor shifted, becoming more solemn. He led me to a small, secluded chamber near the rear of the church, its dim lighting casting long shadows across the ancient stone walls. "Now, Andy," Father Matt began, his voice dropping to a hushed tone. "There are a few more things we need to cover. These are not just routines and regulations. They're sacred rules that must be followed without question. Do you understand?" I nodded, a growing sense of unease gnawing at my insides. It was as if I'd crossed a threshold, entering a world where the rules were not simply guidelines, but absolute commandments. Father Matt's eyes bore into mine as he prepared to unveil these mysterious rules that would govern my life within the walls of St. Michael's Church and Orphanage. Father Matthias regarded me with a solemn expression as he began to list the rules, aware of the need to reassure my young, impressionable mind. "Rule number 1, Andy," he said, his voice steady, "is that lights out is at 9 o'clock every night. You must never leave your room after that hour. It's important for everyone's safety and for maintaining a peaceful atmosphere." That seemed reasonable enough, and I nodded in understanding. Rule number 2, Father Matt continued. When we are in Mass, you must never stare at the statue of St. Agnes, the one to the left of the altar. It's a matter of respect. Looking at it during the service is considered disrespectful. I nodded again, making a mental note to avoid the gaze of the stern-looking saint. Rule number 3, he said, his tone becoming more serious. Sometimes you may hear a voice outside your room at night, beckoning you to play or leave. Ignore it, no matter what it says. You must stay in your room until morning. Remember, rule number 1. The idea of a mysterious voice outside my door made my hair stand on its ends, but I nodded once more, resolved to follow this strange directive. Rule number 4, Father Matt continued, is about the confession booth. If you ever enter the booth and then come out and things seem different, close your eyes and enter the booth again. Say nothing until you hear my voice. It's a matter of spiritual protection, Andy. This rule struck me as particularly odd, but I didn't question it. Father Matt's authority was absolute in my eyes. Finally, rule number 5, he said, his voice heavy with a sense of finality. Under no circumstances should you go into the basement. It's a place that's off-limits to all of us. It's a dark and foreboding place, and it's best to avoid it. As he concluded his list, I couldn't help but feel a deep sense of unease settling over me. These rules, especially the ones about the basement and the confession booth, left me with an unsettling sense of mystery. But Father Matthias had presented them as essential for our well-being, and I knew that as a young boy in this unfamiliar world, I had no choice but to abide by them. Father Matthias nodded in approval as I acknowledged the rules, and then he gently led me towards the heart of St. Michael's, where the everyday life of the church and orphanage unfolded. We soon arrived at a small classroom, where a stern-looking nun with a habit and a ruler in her hand was organizing books. Andy, Father Matt said, this is Sister Margaret. She'll be your teacher and guide during your stay here. Sister Margaret, this is Andy. Sister Margaret's expression softened slightly as she offered a tight-lipped smile. Pleasure to meet you, Andy. We'll have plenty of time to get to know each other. Father Matthias continued. And now, Andy, I'd like to introduce you to Sister Catherine. She's the head nun of St. Michael's and keeps everything in order. If you ever need help or guidance, she's the one to speak to. Sister Catherine, a much older nun with a serene demeanor, nodded at me kindly. Welcome, Andy. We're glad to have you here. With that, Father Matthias and Sister Catherine exchanged a knowing glance, as if there were things left unsaid between them. The head nurse arrived at our side, and I realized that my time with Father Matt was coming to an end. Father Matthias placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. You're in good hands, Andy. Follow Sister Margaret's lead, and remember the rules we discussed. You'll do just fine here. Sister Catherine and I have some matters to attend to. We'll check in on you later. As they left, I couldn't help but feel a growing sense of isolation in this unfamiliar place. I watched Father Matthias and Sister Catherine disappear around a corner, leaving me alone with Sister Margaret, who regarded me with an expectant look, ready to begin my new life at St. Michael's Church and Orphanage. The first few days at St. Michael's were a whirlwind of new faces, routines, and the constant presence of Sister Margaret. While the rules and the cryptic warnings from Father Matthias still weighed heavily on my mind, the presence of other children my age brought a degree of comfort to the otherwise intimidating environment. It was on the third day that I properly met Michael, the 7-year-old boy with a mop of unruly blonde hair whom Father Matt had introduced during my tour. Our paths crossed in the small courtyard behind the church, where a patch of overgrown grass and a single gnarled tree served as our modest playground. I watched as Michael tried to climb the tree with all the enthusiasm and recklessness that only a child could muster. He slipped and tumbled to the ground with a thud, dusting off his clothes with a grin that revealed a missing front tooth. "Hey, you're Andy, right?" he asked, flashing me a mischievous smile as he approached. "I'm Michael." I nodded, relieved to find someone my age to talk to. "Nice to meet you, Michael. You okay?" He shrugged off his fall as if it were nothing. "I fall all the time. No big deal. Want to play a game?" I hesitated, glancing around to make sure Sister Margaret wasn't watching. It was the first time I'd been given any semblance of free time since my arrival, and the idea of playing was too tempting to resist. "Sure. What do you want to play?" Michael's eyes sparkled with excitement as he explained a game he called Shadow Tag. It involved darting around the courtyard, trying to step on each other's shadows while avoiding being tagged. It was a simple game, but it offered a much-needed break from the strict routines of St. Michael's. As we played, Michael shared stories about the other children, like Mary and Sarah, whom I had yet to meet. He spoke of their personalities, their likes and dislikes, and the pranks they sometimes played on Sister Margaret when they thought they could get away with it. His tales painted a picture of camaraderie and mischief that gave me hope in the midst of the eerie rules and unfamiliar surroundings. Despite the strange and sometimes ominous nature of St. Michael's, my budding friendship with Michael began to anchor me in this peculiar place. It was a small ray of light in a world that seemed increasingly shrouded in shadows and secrets. That afternoon, as I played with Michael in the courtyard, I noticed a tall, dark-haired girl standing near the entrance. She seemed older than us, and something about her demeanor gave me pause. Her name, as I'd heard from Father Matt, was Sarah. As we approached her cold gaze met mine, and she sized me up with a critical look. "You're the new kid, right?" she said, her voice tinged with an edge of superiority. I nodded nervously, my excitement from playing with Michael fading quickly in her presence. "Yeah, I'm Andy." Sarah's lips curled into a condescending smirk. "Well, Andy, you better watch your step around here. St. Michael's isn't a place for kids who can't follow the rules." I didn't know what I'd done to earn her disapproval, but her words made me feel uneasy. Michael glanced at me, clearly uncomfortable with Sarah's attitude. Ignoring her, I turned my attention back to the game, hoping she would leave us be. But as we continued playing, something peculiar happened that sent shivers down my spine. Out of the corner of my eye, I thought I saw a shadow move behind one of the church's windows. As I steadied my gaze, I saw what looked like a person glaring at me through the glass panes. Except it couldn't have been a person. It was as tall as the whole stained glass window, and it was paper thin. Although I could see its legs, its slender arms reached so far that I couldn't see any hands. I could see 2 faint glowing spots where its eyes should be. It was as if the gaze of this creature was piercing me down to my very soul. My heart raced as I tried to make sense of it, my gaze fixed on the window. The bony, jagged joints of its arms filled me with an ominous, overwhelming sense of dread. Just as I was about to ask the others if they'd seen it too, Sarah gave me a sudden shove, sending me sprawling to the ground. I landed hard, the breath knocked out of me, and I struggled to regain my bearings. Before I could react, one of the nuns, Sister Margaret, came rushing over, her expression a mix of concern and sternness. "What's going on here, children?" she asked, her eyes narrowing as she surveyed the scene. Still shaken from the fall, I stammered, I saw something in the window, sister. A shadow." Sister Margaret's gaze followed mine to the window, but there was nothing there now, just the fading daylight. She sighed and helped me to my feet. "Sometimes our minds play tricks on us, Andy. There's nothing to be afraid of. Now go inside and wash up for dinner." As I walked away, the feeling of dread lingered, and I couldn't help but wonder about the shadow I'd seen and what secrets St. Michael's held within its ancient walls. I took a final glance at the stained panes, and to my dismay, the shadow was gone. I had no choice but to put this in the back of my mind and continue my day. Night descended upon St. Michael's, casting long shadows throughout the ancient hallways. Sister Margaret, after our evening meal, directed us to our rooms for the night. It was during these quiet hours that Michael and I had a chance to talk, free from the watchful eyes of the nuns. We sat on the edge of our beds, whispering in the dim candlelight. Michael, who'd always appeared cheerful, leaned in closer, his expression more serious. "You know, Andy," he began, "Sarah might act all timid in front of the adults, but she's a real bully when they're not around. Be careful around her." I nodded, grateful for the warning. I had already sensed something unsettling about her. Then Michael's voice dropped to a hushed tone, and he cast a cautious glance at the room's window. "And about that shadow you saw," he said. "I've seen it too." My heart raced as I leaned in, eager to hear more. "You've seen it? What is it?" Michael shook his head slowly, his expression haunted. "I don't know, but I've heard whispers from the other kids. They say there are things in this place, things we can't understand. That's why we have to follow the rules, Andy. We can't afford to look into things around here." His words sparked an uneasy feeling in the pit of my stomach, and I couldn't help but think about Father Matthias's cryptic rules and warnings. "What do you mean, follow the rules?" Michael glanced around nervously before continuing. "You saw how Sister Margaret and the others act. They pretend everything's normal, but it's not. There are secrets here, things they don't want us to know, so we have to be careful and stay out of trouble." I nodded, my mind swirling with a mixture of curiosity and fear. St. Michael's had transformed from a place of refuge into a cryptic labyrinth of mysteries and ominous shadows. As Michael and I settled into our beds for the night, I couldn't shake the feeling that our journey into this enigmatic world was only just beginning. I'd soon find that my suspicions were right. The night was silent as I lay in my small bed, the moonlight casting eerie patterns on the walls of my room. Despite the unsettling events of the day, I had managed to drift into a fitful sleep. That's when I heard it, a faint, distant whisper calling my name, like a gentle breeze through the cracks of the room. "Andy," the voice murmured, barely audible. "Andy, come and play." I stirred in my bed, my eyes darting around the room. Michael lay nearby, peacefully asleep. The room was still, and bathed in shadows. The voice couldn't have come from there. I tried to dismiss it as a dream, closing my eyes and attempting to return to sleep. But then I heard my name again, more insistent this time, like a distant plea. My heart raced, and I realized the voice was coming from beyond the door. I sat up in bed, my pulse quickening as I strained to listen. The lock to my door slowly unlocked with a distant click. The voice persisted, soft but persuasive, beckoning me to open the door and join them in a game. Curiosity overcame my fear, and I swung my legs out of bed, making my way toward the door with caution. My hand hovered over the knob, and my breath hitched in my throat. The voice continued its siren call, growing stronger with each passing second. "Come on, Andy. Don't be shy. Let's play shadow tag together. It'll be so much fun." The voice beckoned. "Come out and play." I couldn't resist any longer. My fingers closed around the cool brass handle, and I slowly turned it. The door inched open, revealing a sliver of darkness on the other side. Just as I was about to step through, the door slammed shut with surprising force. I let out a startled gasp and stumbled back, my heart pounding in my chest. As soon as the door shut, the lock clicked instantly, locking the door from the outside again. I turned around and saw Michael standing there, bathed in the dim moonlight. His eyes were wide with terror, and his voice trembled as he scolded me in a hushed, frantic tone. "Andy, what are you doing? You can't open the door! You can't listen to the voices!" Michael's fear was palpable, his grip on my shoulder like a vice. "Have you forgotten the rules?" I was taken aback, the intensity of Michael's reaction sending a chill down my spine. "But I thought it was one of the other kids," I stammered, my voice barely a whisper. Michael shook his head, his expression grave. "It's not a kid, Andy. It's something else. Something that's not supposed to be here. You have to promise me you won't listen to those voices. You won't break the rules. You'd be putting us all in danger. The last kid to wander out during the night never returned. Father Matthias told us they were adopted, but I knew better." I nodded, my heart heavy with fear and confusion. Children have gone missing here? My stomach swelled as I contemplated this disturbing revelation. St. Michael's had become a place of endless secrets and hidden dangers, and I was beginning to understand that there was far more to fear within these walls than I'd ever imagined. The following morning, the echoes of the previous night's eerie events still lingered in my mind. I awoke to the soft but firm voice of Sister Catherine as she made her rounds, rousing the children from their slumber and sending us off to begin the day. "Come along, children," she said with a warm but authoritative tone, her presence commanding respect. "It's time for morning classes." Michael and I followed the other children, our footsteps echoing through the ancient hallways of St. Michael's. The classrooms were dimly lit, and Sister Margaret stood at the front, ready to impart her knowledge. Despite the shadows that clung to the walls, she began the day's lessons with a smile, her stern exterior giving way to a genuine passion for teaching. The lessons passed quickly, and soon it was time for Mass. The children filed into the church, where the familiar scent of incense filled the air. I took my seat alongside Michael, the solemnity of the occasion washing over me. As the ceremony progressed, a strange sensation washed over me, a feeling that I was being watched. It was as if a pair of unseen eyes bore into the back of my head, urging me to turn and look. My gaze began to shift from person to person, trying to identify the source of this disconcerting feeling. Minutes passed, and the sensation intensified. My unease grew with each passing moment, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. I continued to scan the congregation, desperately searching for the source of my discomfort. Then, as if drawn by an invisible force, my gaze settled on the statue of St. Agnes, just left of the altar. The statue's cold stone eyes seemed to pierce through me, locking onto mine. It was an unnerving sight, leaving me feeling helpless and mortified. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the statue. It was as if a powerful force held me in its grip, commanding me to stare. I felt a strange, unsettling connection to the figure, and it was as though the statue's gaze held some unfathomable secret. Just as I was about to lose myself completely in its stony visage, Michael grabbed my arm suddenly, jolting me back to reality. He leaned in close, his voice barely audible over the hushed prayers of the congregation. "Andy, stop staring," he whispered urgently. "Remember the rules." I blinked and tore my gaze away from the statue, my chest pounding. The rules Father Matthias had imparted upon me echoed in my mind, and I knew that I had come dangerously close to breaking one of them. St. Michael's was a place where even the statues seemed to hold mysteries, and I couldn't afford to forget the consequences of curiosity, whatever they may be. Mass continued, the solemn rituals unfolding as the congregation joined in prayer and reflection. I did my best to keep my gaze fixed on the hymnals, avoiding any temptation to look back at the unsettling statue of St. Agnes. But the feeling of being watched lingered, and it was a constant battle to keep my eyes forward. Eventually, my eyes did wander back to the statue, however briefly, and I saw that the statue was no longer staring at me. It was as if its head had turned to face another orphan while I was looking away. I shook this off, convincing myself that my eyes were merely playing tricks on me, but the sense of dread lingered. As the Mass neared its conclusion, Father Matthias rose to address the congregation. "After today's service, I encourage all of you to visit the confessional booth," he announced, his voice carrying through the hallowed space. "It is a time for reflection and cleansing of the soul. Please take this opportunity to unburden your hearts." The minutes stretched on as the congregation filed out of the pews, making their way to the confessional booths. I stood in line, my heart pounding with anxiety, the image of St. Agnes's statue still etched in my mind. Finally, it was my turn. I entered the confessional booth and sat in the small, dimly lit chamber. The wooden panel separating me from Father Matthias seemed impenetrable, but I knew this was the place to reveal my deepest secrets. The confessional booth seemed both comforting and foreboding, its walls embracing me like a cocoon, while also trapping me in an unfamiliar darkness. I shifted on the hard wooden bench, my small frame hardly filling the space. The scent of old wood and incense clung to the air, a mixture of sanctity and solemnity. Father Matthias's voice emerged from the other side of the wooden partition, his tone gentle and inviting. "Speak, my child," he said softly. "What burdens your young heart?" I hesitated, uncertain how to put into words the fears and anxieties that had been weighing me down, but I knew that I had to share the truth about my mother, about the eyes in the darkness, about my own fear. "It's about my mom," I began, my voice quivering. "She had a breakdown. That's what the doctor told me. She said she saw eyes in the darkness, Father. It scared her so much." The confessional booth seemed to cocoon me in silence as Father Matthias absorbed my words. There was a profound understanding in his response. "I'm deeply sorry to hear about your mother's struggles, Andy. Such experiences can be frightening, especially for a young child." Tears welled up in my eyes as I continued. "But, Father, there's something I've never told anyone, not even the doctors. I saw those eyes, too, in our old house when it was dark. I saw them. But I didn't tell anyone because I was afraid they'd lock me away like they did with my mom." The confession felt like a heavy burden lifting from my young shoulders, and I waited anxiously for Father Matthias's response. There was a thoughtful pause on the other side of the partition. "Andy," Father Matthias finally spoke, his voice filled with compassion. "We all bear our own burdens, and sometimes the truth can be a daunting thing to share. By opening your heart today, you've already taken a significant step toward healing." I wiped away the tears that had spilled onto my cheeks, grateful for Father Matthias's understanding. "What should I do, Father? How can I make up for being dishonest?" Father Matthias offered a suitable penance, instructing me to recite a particular prayer a certain number of times and to seek guidance from the Lord in moments of doubt and fear. We continued our conversation, delving into the depths of my soul and my struggles with faith and the inexplicable darkness that seemed to haunt me. As we spoke, time seemed to blur, and the confessional booth transformed into a sanctuary of understanding and solace. Father Matthias's words provided a comforting anchor in the turbulent sea of my fears. Finally, as our conversation neared its end, Father Matthias offered his absolution, and I left the confessional booth with a newfound sense of hope and determination. I knew that the shadows and secrets of St.Michael's were far from over, but perhaps, through faith and confession, I could find a path toward understanding and salvation. After the confessional, I left with a heart lightened by my confession to Father Matthias. The day continued, with classes and prayers, but I couldn't help but feel a newfound sense of peace and clarity within me. When the time for play in the courtyard finally arrived, I joined Michael and the other children in a game of tag. We darted around the overgrown grass, our laughter filling the air, momentarily erasing the ominous weight that seemed to hang over St. Michael's. However, my brief moment of happiness was shattered when Sarah, as if seeking an opportunity to torment me, joined our game. Her cold gaze fell upon me, and I knew that trouble was brewing. Sarah didn't waste any time. She pushed me roughly, sending me sprawling onto the uneven ground. Pain seared through my palm as it scraped against a jagged stone, and I clutched my injured hand, a searing cut dripping thin lines of blood. Michael rushed to my side, his face etched with concern. "Andy, are you okay?" Tears welled up in my eyes as I nodded, my injured hand throbbing. I knew I needed to seek help. With Michael's support, I made my way to the medical office of the church. Inside the small, dimly lit room, The head nun, Sister Catherine, waited for us. Her demeanor was as stern as I had come to expect, but there was a hint of warmth in her eyes as she assessed my injured hand. "What happened, Andy?" she asked, her voice carrying a maternal concern. I recounted the incident with Sarah, how she had pushed me, causing me to cut my hand. Sister Catherine nodded, her expression a mix of sympathy and disappointment. She gently cleaned and bandaged my wound, her touch surprisingly tender. Then, as she worked, she began to speak, her words revealing a startling connection. "You know, I knew your mother, Andy," she said, her voice softer now. "She came here when she was pregnant with you." I blinked in surprise, the mention of my mother catching me off guard. "You knew my mom?" Sister Catherine nodded, her gaze distant as she continued to treat my hand. "Yes, she sought refuge here during a difficult time in her life. She was carrying you then, and we provided her with shelter and support." I was overwhelmed by a rush of emotions. My mother, who had been the source of my earliest memories, was connected to this mysterious place in ways I couldn't have imagined. It was as if St. Michael's had been a part of my life since before I was born. As Sister Catherine finished tending to my hand, she offered me a reassuring smile. "Your mother faced many challenges, Andy, but she found strength here, just as you will. You're not alone in this journey." With her words, I felt a newfound sense of belonging, as if St. Michael's Church and Orphanage held the key to unlocking the mysteries of my past and the enigmatic shadows that seemed to follow me. I left the medical office with a bandaged hand, a swirl of emotions and questions whirling in my mind. The connection between my mother and St. Michael's was a revelation, but it also deepened the enigma surrounding this place. As I exited, another nun entered, giving me a tender smile as we crossed paths. As I rounded the corner of the doorway, I stopped to tie my shoe, the mundane task providing a brief moment of distraction from the mysteries that had unfolded. Unbeknownst to the nuns in the medical office, I overheard their conversation as they spoke just inside. The younger nun, her voice tinged with curiosity, asked Sister Catherine, "Is that boy the son of the woman who was here 8 years ago?" There was a pause, and I could almost feel the weight of Sister Catherine's memories as she spoke. "She was a troubled soul, Mary. She struggled to follow the rules of this place. It was a challenging time for her." My heart sank as I listened to the conversation. It seemed that my mother's presence had left a lasting impression on St. Michael's, and her struggles were still remembered by the nuns. Curiosity gnawed at me, and I couldn't help but stay a moment longer, my ears straining to catch every word. Sister Mary hesitated before finally asking, "And, what about the basement? I've heard rumors that she went down there." Sister Catherine's response was stern, and she cut off the conversation abruptly. "We do not speak of the basement, sister. It's forbidden." I strained to hear more, my curiosity pushing me to listen. However, the nuns' conversation seemed to have ended, and I couldn't risk being caught eavesdropping. Scurrying away from the doorway, I made my way down the corridor just as I heard the nuns start to exit the medical office. The mention of the basement only added to the growing list of mysteries surrounding St. Michael's, and I was determined to uncover the truth, even if it meant breaking the rules. During the next class, I found myself sitting next to Michael, the ever-present sense of curiosity gnawing at me. The events of the past days had only deepened my need to understand the mysteries of St. Michael's. I leaned toward Michael, my voice a whisper. Michael, can you tell me more about these rules Father Matt mentioned? I asked, my eyes narrowing with intrigue. Why shouldn't we stare at the statue during Mass? Michael hesitated for a moment, his gaze darting around the room. Finally, he leaned in, his voice barely audible. Andy, the rules they're strange, but they're meant to protect us. Father Matthias says they keep us safe from things we can't understand. I nodded, absorbing his words, but my curiosity wasn't satisfied. What about the rule for the confessional booth? What does Father Matt mean that things could seem different? Michael glanced at me, his expression troubled. In the confessional, Andy, you have to be careful. It's like a doorway. And if you're not careful, things can change. Always look around when you leave a confession. If something's off, you'll know. Just shut your eyes and go back inside. My heart raced at the cryptic answer, but I pressed on, my voice trembling slightly. And what about the basement, Michael? I heard the nuns talking about it, and it seemed important. Michael's face turned pale, and he shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He seemed reluctant to speak, his eyes avoiding mine. The basement, Andy. It's a place we're not supposed to go. It's off limits for a reason. It's not safe. My curiosity burned brighter than ever, and I was determined to uncover the secrets of St. Michael's. But Michael's reaction to my question about the basement left me with an unsettling feeling that some things were better left unexplored. Despite the growing unease that hung over the church and orphanage, my determination to understand its mysteries remained unwavering. That night, my mind was filled with questions, curiosity burning like a fire within me. I wanted to learn more about my mother's time at St. Michael's, about the creation of the rules, and about the secrets hidden within the forbidden basement. Determination fueled my desire to uncover the truth. As Michael and I settled into our beds, the room plunged into darkness, the only source of light being the faint glow of the moon seeping through the curtains. The quiet of the night surrounded us, broken only by the soft rustling of the bed sheets. I couldn't sleep. Restlessly, I tossed and turned for what felt like hours, my mind consumed by the mysteries that lay just beyond my grasp. And then, in the dead of night, I heard it. A new voice, soft and haunting, echoing from the hallway outside our room. It whispered my name, trying its hardest to lure me out into the unknown. Andy, come out and play. Andy, the voice cooed playfully. My heart raced, and I lay frozen beneath my blanket, my breath held. The voice continued to beckon. Andy, come out. We can talk about your mother. I know all about her, Andy. The door to our room unlocked from the outside, and it creaked open just a crack, letting in a sliver of the eerie, moonlit hallway. My instincts screamed at me to stay hidden, to resist the lure of the voice, but the desire to know was overpowering. I considered emerging from my hiding place, my curiosity threatening to overwhelm my fear. But instead, I chose to remain hidden, hoping to catch any information the voice might reveal. Slowly, the door inched closed and locked once more, and the voice retreated into the darkness of the hallway. With bated breath, I lay in my bed, my mind racing and my heart pounding. The secrets of St. Michael's were no closer, but I knew that the path to uncovering them was fraught with danger and uncertainty. Eventually, exhaustion claimed me, and I drifted into a restless sleep, haunted by the whispers of the night. Little did I know that this restless night would be nothing compared to what St. Michael's had in store for me. Another day at St. Michael's passed in a haze, with each minute stretching into eternity as the sun's golden fingers crept toward the horizon. Evening was fast approaching, and with it came the somber call of the bells that beckon the faithful to gather at St. Michael's once more. The setting sun bathed the chapel in a warm golden glow. Acting as an altar boy for the day, it was my solemn duty to assist Father Matthias during the evening mass. Donning the ceremonial robe and lighting the candles, I found solace in the rituals and routines that accompanied the service. With each step, I moved with purpose, a silent observer in the grand theater of worship. The chapel itself was a place of contradictions, a sanctuary of both solace and unease. While the intricate stained glass windows bathed the pews in a mosaic of colors, they also cast a web of distorted shadows, like ethereal fingers reaching out to grasp the souls of the congregation. But the true source of my discomfort lay elsewhere. It was the statue of St. Agnes that loomed beside the altar, a lifelike figure carved from stone, with eyes that seemed to follow me wherever I moved. It was as if the saint herself bore witness to my every thought and action, her cold gaze a constant reminder of something unseen but deeply foreboding. As the church service continued, I performed my duties diligently, assisting Father Matt in various tasks. The specifics of the rituals and prayers are a blur in my memory, overshadowed by the growing unease I felt at the time in the presence of St. Agnes. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, scrutinized, and judged by those unyielding stone eyes. I began to question my own sanity as I swore that from the corner of my eye I saw that St. Agnes had her head turned to face me. It was as if the statue had come to life, but whenever I looked directly at her, she remained facing the congregation, almost as if she snapped back into place just as I turned to look. The tension reached its breaking point when Father Matt led the congregation in prayer, and we all bowed our heads. I closed my eyes as well, joining in with the rest of the faithful. Yet, it was during this moment of collective devotion that I felt the stare of St. Agnes more intensely than ever before. In my mind's eye, I pictured her turned toward me, her gaze unrelenting and piercing. Unable to withstand the pressure any longer, I reluctantly opened my eyes. St. Agnes remained facing the pews, just as she always did. A wave of relief washed over me as I continued to stare at her while the prayer went on. As I continued to stare, I felt an ominous presence looming over me. Slowly and silently, the head of St. Agnes began to turn until her gaze was upon me. I couldn't tear my gaze away from the statue as her head completed its eerie rotation to face me fully, not until its cold, lifeless stone eyes bore into my soul. My heart began to race, and I slammed my eyes shut in terror. In a state of complete horror and fear, I clung to my faith, hoping for the prayer's swift conclusion. When it was finally over and the congregation began to stir, I hesitated to open my eyes again. But when I finally mustered the courage to do so, I found St. Agnes had returned to her original position, her unchanging visage once more directed at the congregation. The unsettling experience left me shaken and filled with a growing sense of dread, deepening the mystery surrounding this eerie statue. Now, it was time for confession. I joined the line of the faithful, each step bringing me closer to the confessional booth. The sensation of being watched, particularly by the unrelenting stare of the statue of St. Agnes, grew more intense with every moment. It was as though the very walls of the chapel were closing in, and the eyes of the saint bore into my very soul. By the time I stood next up in line, the feeling was nearly unbearable. My heart raced, my palms grew clammy, and a lump formed in my throat. I rushed inside the confessional booth, the heavy wooden door closing behind me with a mournful creak. I was now alone, encased in the dimly lit chamber, with only the screen that separated me from the priest. Sitting in the confessional, I felt the weight of the sins I was about to confess press down upon me. The shadows danced around me, and the ominous presence of St. Agnes's statue seemed to permeate even into this sacred space. It was as if the chapel itself held its breath, awaiting my admission of guilt. Beginning my confession, I waited for Father Matt to formally address me. "Bless me, Father, for I have sinned," I began hesitantly. "Go on, my child," Father Matt encouraged. I overheard the nuns talking," I admitted, "about my mother and what happened to her." Father Matt's voice remained gentle as he replied, "It's not right to eavesdrop on others, Andy. We should respect their privacy and their conversations." "I know, Father," I replied, my guilt heavy. "But I needed to know more about my mother's time here." Father Matt sighed softly before speaking again. "We must remember that there are certain things that should remain in the past, my son." I nodded, acknowledging his wisdom, but there was something else I needed to confess, something that gnawed at me like a persistent itch. "Father," I began hesitantly, "I also heard them talking about the basement, about my mother going down there." Father Matt's tone grew stern, and a hint of concern entered his voice. "Andy, you must never inquire about the basement. It's an off-limits topic, and you must promise me that you won't delve into it any further." I gulped, realizing I had crossed a line I shouldn't have. "I promise, Father. I won't ask about the basement again." With my confession complete, Father Matt offered me absolution, and I left the confessional booth. But I couldn't help but feel a heavy weight of unease pressing upon me. Father Matthias's words echoed in my mind, urging me to let go of my curiosity about the basement, something I'm not sure I could do. As I walked away, I found myself staring at my shoes, lost in thought. Then, a chilling memory surged to the forefront of my mind. The shadow I'd seen in the courtyard the day Sarah pushed me. It was a grotesque and nightmarish sight, something that should never exist in the realm of the living. The shadow appeared human, yet its proportions were impossibly distorted. Its long arms seemed to stretch so far down that its hands had to be scraping the ground, although I couldn't tell from where I was standing. The mere recollection of that horrendous monstrosity was enough to make me shudder in fear. Lost in these disturbing thoughts, I began to notice something odd about the chapel. My gaze fell upon a large crack in the wooden floor, one that hadn't been there before. I only noticed because I had to take an exaggerated step so I wouldn't trip over it. It snaked across the aisle, a sinister rift in the very foundation of St. Michael's. But that wasn't all. As I looked around, I realized that the chapel had transformed. The pews were now in a state of decay, their wood rotten and splintered. The windows were shattered, casting eerie beams of moonlight into the once sacred space. The sky outside was pitch black, devoid of stars or any semblance of normalcy aside from a full moon, slightly obscured by the crumpled frames of the glass panes. The pit of my stomach plummeted as I turned my attention to the statues that line the chapel, my gaze lingering on St. Agnes. The other statues, those of saints and angels, lay in ruins, their forms crumpled and broken, but St. Agnes remained untouched, her cold stare now piercing me harder than ever before. Panic welled up within me, and I began to notice something even more disturbing: the absence of any other souls in the chapel. The congregation had vanished, and I stood alone amidst the desolation. Fear clawed at my chest, and I stumbled backward, my breaths coming in quick, shallow gasps. It was as though I had stepped into a nightmare, a distorted and twisted version of the familiar chapel I had known. St. Michael's had become a haunting and surreal realm, and I was trapped within its nightmarish grip, with no escape in sight. My heart pounded in my chest as I remembered Father Matthias's words about what to do if things changed after confession. Rule number 4: if you ever enter the booth and then come out and things seem different, close your eyes and enter the booth again. Say nothing until you hear my voice, Father Matt had said. Heeding his words with a sense of urgency, I turned my gaze back to the confessional booth, my intention to close my eyes and seek refuge there. But before I could make a move, a chilling noise erupted from behind me, a discordant, otherworldly chattering, like that of a demonic grasshopper. It sent a jolt of terror down my spine, freezing me in my tracks. The sound was as repulsive and jagged as nails on a chalkboard, each demonic chitter causing me to flinch instinctively. Slowly, I turned toward the source of the ominous sound, my breath caught in my throat. There, in the darkest corner of the chapel, I saw them, the same faint, glowing orbs I had glimpsed through the window on that fateful day. The eyes in the darkness. They hovered in the air, high above, like malevolent stars in the night. It was only now that my brain made the connection between the shadow in the window and the eyes in the dark that my mother and I had seen before they took her away. Was it the same set of eyes? At that moment, I was convinced they were the same eyes that drove me and my mother apart, the same eyes that had plagued my nightmares ever since I entered this place, the same eyes that had conditioned me to avoid looking into the dark spots of rooms in fear that the eyes would arise out of the shadows to stare back at me. And then, from the shadows, they came, 10 long, jagged fingers, impossibly black against the abyss, emerging with slow, deliberate movements. These unnatural appendages were attached to arms that seemed to stretch on forever, reaching out for me with an unnatural and sinister intent. With each slight movement of the creature's fingers, I could hear audible cracks and chirps, as if the chattering sound I could hear was this thing's bones and joints cracking and popping as it completes each grotesque movement. Terror gripped me, paralyzing my every muscle. My mind raced for a way to escape this nightmare, but it was as if the very air had thickened, holding me captive. The chattering grew louder, more maddening, as the monstrous appendages inched closer. The spider-like fingers twitched and clawed at the empty space between us as a sense of impending doom filled my body. I knew I had to move, to do something, but my body refused to obey. The chapel had transformed into a grotesque theater of horror, and I was trapped in a spotlight, awaiting an unspeakable fate at the hands of this otherworldly presence. My survival instincts kicked in just as those bony hands closed in on me. With a surge of adrenaline, I forced my body to move, breaking into a desperate run. Panic fueled my every move as I began racing away from the looming nightmare. But as I fled, my foot caught on the jagged crack in the floor. I tumbled forward, landing on my hands and knees, pain shooting through me as I struggled to regain my footing. That was all the time the monstrosity needed. Its bony hand clamped onto my ankle, while the other seized my forearm, and it began to drag me mercilessly toward the dark, foreboding corner of the chapel. I screamed and kicked with all my might, desperately trying to free myself from the creature's sinister grip. My heart pounded in my chest as I fought for my life, each moment of resistance filled with terror and agony. With one final desperate effort, I managed to pry myself free, leaving me gasping for breath and drenched in cold sweat. With newfound determination, I sprinted toward the confessional booth. Just as I reached the door, I noticed a movement in the corner of my vision. My gaze darted toward St. Agnes, and what I saw shook me to my core. The saint was no longer in her place beside the crumpled statues. Instead, she had moved past the altar, her stone form seemingly frozen in mid-stride, as if she were walking toward me. And what was more unsettling was that she stopped moving the instant I looked at her. Fear gnawed at my insides as I flung open the door to the confessional booth and threw myself inside. I turned to secure the door, my breath ragged and my heart pounding. But before I closed it, I couldn't resist stealing one last glance at the dark corner. The eyes were still there, those lifeless spots of light that had haunted my nightmares. The hands had moved closer, now just feet away from the confessional. Their impossibly long arms had stretched all the way from the inky darkness, and the realization of how close I'd come to a gruesome fate sent a shudder through me. I slammed the door to the booth shut, hoping it would be enough to keep those demonic hands out. My heart raced as I huddled inside the confessional booth, my mind swirling with fear. I couldn't shake the dreadful feeling that the shadow in the corner or the statue of St. Agnes might still come for me. I was trapped within St.Michael's, a sanctuary that had transformed into a realm of unspeakable horrors. Every creak and shuffle of the chapel seemed like an impending doom. Then, a shadow began to form in front of the confessional door, and I heard the unmistakable crackling and popping of joints moving. My pulse quickened, and a cold sweat broke out on my forehead. The creature was drawing closer, its presence undeniable. In a desperate bid to protect myself, I recalled Father Matthias's words. Close your eyes and enter the booth again. Say nothing until you hear my voice. With trembling hands, I squeezed my eyes shut, blocking out the horror that lurked just beyond the door. Slowly, as if in response to my obedience, the unsettling sounds of the creature began to fade, replaced by an eerie silence. Time passed in a torturous crawl, until finally I heard Father Matthias's soothing voice. "Is there anything else, Andy? You've been quiet for some time now." I swallowed my fear with an audible gulp as I asked the only question that mattered. "Father?" My voice trembling. "Is it safe to go outside?" It seems Father Matthias understood the weight of my unspoken terror, since he assured me, "Everything is okay now, my child. You have my permission to skip your final class of the day and retreat to your room if it would make you feel better. You're safe now." His words were a lifeline, a promise of safety and sanctuary. With a shaky breath, I felt a small measure of relief, even if I couldn't be sure that his promise of safety was guaranteed. I would take refuge in my room, a small haven away from the horrors that lurked within St. Michael's, and I hoped that somehow I could find answers to the mysteries that now consumed my every thought. I had retreated to my room after the harrowing encounter in the chapel, seeking refuge in the familiar confines of my small haven. I lay on my bed, my mind replaying the sequence of events over and over, as if trying to make sense of the nightmarish reality I had faced. It wasn't long before Michael, my newfound friend in this strange and foreboding place, walked into my room. He greeted me with a friendly smile, but quickly noticed the deep unease that lingered in my eyes. "Hey, Andy," Michael said, his voice filled with concern. "You seem shaken up. What happened?" I hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to put my terrifying encounter into words. But I knew I couldn't keep it to myself. Slowly, I recounted the events that had unfolded in the chapel, from the strange transformation of the surroundings to the nightmarish creature that had reached for me, with its impossibly long arms and glowing eyes. Michael listened intently, his expression growing more serious with each detail I shared. When I finished, he let out a long sigh and spoke with a mixture of shock and relief. "Andy, you're lucky to be alive," he said, his voice tinged with genuine concern. "I've been here for a couple years now, and I've never seen anything like that. But I'm even more surprised to hear about that shadowy monster thing you described, the one with the eyes and the long arms. I've never heard of it revealing itself like that, or reaching for someone like it did to you." My heart sank at Michael's words. If he, a resident of St. Michael's for so long, had never had a run-in with that creature the way I had, it raised unsettling questions about why it had singled me out. What did it want from me? And what secrets did this place hold that had brought such a perplexing presence into my life? As I pondered these questions, Michael and I exchanged a knowing glance, both aware that we had stumbled upon something far darker and more mysterious than we could have ever imagined within the walls of St. Michael's. I could only cower in fear of what may come to pass. The night seemed endless as I tossed and turned in my bed, haunted by the nightmarish sights of the last few days. The memories played out like a relentless nightmare in my mind, each unsettling encounter etching itself deeper into my consciousness. But eventually, exhaustion overcame my restless thoughts, and I began to drift into a restless slumber. I slipped into dreams. My mind turned to my mother and her own encounter with the mysterious eyes in the darkness. Her memory brought me a strange sense of comfort, a reminder that I was not alone in facing the enigma that shrouded St. Michael's. As the night wore on, and the church was cloaked in an eerie silence, I awoke in my bed, haunted by the events of the day and the secrets that seemed to pulse within the very walls of St. Michael's. The moonlight filtered through the small window, casting elongated shadows that danced on the walls of our room. Beside me, Michael lay sound asleep, his rhythmic breathing the only sign of life in the otherwise still room. But just as I was starting to drift back into a fitful slumber, I heard it, the unmistakable sound of someone fumbling with the doorknob of our locked bedroom door. My heart leaped into my throat as I shot up in bed, my eyes wide with fear. The doorknob rattled violently, and the door shook under the pressure of someone or something trying to force their way inside. Panic surged through me as I clutched my blanket tightly, seeking refuge behind its thin shield. Michael awoke in the midst of the commotion, his eyes filled with fear, but his voice steady. "It's going to be okay, Andy," he whispered, his tone comforting. "We just need to pray." Nodding vigorously, I joined Michael in reciting the prayers we had learned, our voices trembling but growing stronger with each word. The door continued to shake, as if an unseen force sought to break through. We recited the Lord's Prayer, the Hail Mary, and other supplications, our voices growing louder as we sought protection and solace in our faith. As we continued to pray, the rattling of the door grew more violent, and the air in the room seemed charged with an otherworldly presence. It was as if the very essence of the church itself had come to life, and its malevolent gaze was fixed upon us. But we did not waver. We held fast to our prayers, seeking refuge in the divine. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, the violent shaking of the door ceased, leaving behind an eerie silence that hung heavily in the room. We remained huddled together, our hearts pounding in our chests, listening intently for any signs of danger. But all we heard were the distant echoes of heavy footsteps, slowly retreating down the hallway, fading into the night. With the worst of the ordeal seemingly over, exhaustion washed over us, and the room felt less oppressive. Michael and I found solace in each other's presence, and eventually, as our fatigue overcame our fear, we drifted into a fitful sleep, our prayers still echoing softly in the corners of our dreams. Little did we know that the mysteries of St. Michael's Church were far from unraveling, and the events of that night were only the beginning of a deeper and more sinister darkness that lay in wait.
Oh, boy. I just came back from twisting the heads off all my action figure collectibles, because I became too worried that some of them were watching me and following me with their heads. Ugh. This story has cost me a small fortune and unlocked a new paranoia. Just what I need. It sounds to me like this church is acting as a kind of lid for whatever evil is living in the basement, and not really doing a very good job. I suspect there is more to this story, and if you'd like to read it, follow the links below and keep an eye out for when our author posts more in the series. Who knows? If things go well, you might even hear it here. If you enjoyed this story, please leave a like on this video and check out the author in the links below. Your support has carried us to over 666 subscribers as of the publication of this video, so it only seemed right to haunt your mind with devils. Please also subscribe for more stories like this one. Whatever you do, don't even look at St. Agnes. And don't fall asleep.